Let us pray. And now, God, may your word be proclaimed, either through me or in spite of me. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, some of you can remember when mood rings were a big fad back in the 70s. They were especially popular, as I understand, with young girls. The theory behind the mood ring was that body heat fluctuates with the emotional state of the wearer, and the ring is attuned to your body's temperature. Now, none of that was ever established scientifically, of course. But like most fads, it provided some fun for people, and it still does today. You know, my favorite example of mood ring humor concerns a woman who reported that her husband was unhappy with her mood swings. So he bought her a mood ring. He hoped that he would be able to monitor her moods and prepare himself accordingly. Well, it worked. He discovered that when she was in a good mood, the ring turned green. And when she was in a bad mood, the ring left a big red mark on his forehead. Maybe next time, she said, you'll buy me a diamond ring. You know, everybody gets in a bad mood at some time or another. Some of those moods, however, if not controlled, could lead to some very bad things. Timothy McVeigh, in explaining why he bombed the federal building in Oklahoma City, said that he was angry with the government over the way that they handled the Branch Davidian crisis in Waco. He got angry. So he blew up a building and killed hundreds of innocent people. All of us at some time or another experience anger or resentment or hostility, even rage. Thankfully, though, we handle it better than Timothy McVeigh. Anger is a big issue in our lives, though. I know it is. It causes us to lash out at our spouses. It causes us to lash out at our children or at our parents. We unleash it on others on the road. Okay, I'm guilty of that one. Or in the workplace. Our anger makes us and those around us miserable. In his Sermon on the Mount, Jesus confronts the subject of anger head on. He says, I tell you, anyone that is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, he uses the word raka, R-A-C-A, raka, an Aramaic term of contempt, much like we would use the word idiot. Anybody who calls another person an idiot, he says, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, why would Jesus make these extreme comments about an emotion as universal as anger? Well, it's because the outward act always begins with an inward emotion. I believe that we really need to give these words of Jesus some prayerful consideration this morning. As we have seen more and more school and church shootings and urban bombings, it appears that there are more and more people, teenagers and adults, walking around like ticking time bombs. The pervasiveness of anger in our society is reaching appalling proportions. You can't have a civilized conversation with some people without them exploding on some subject or another. It's scary. Now, obviously, very few people will ever erupt into such fury that they kill somebody, but the potential is still there. So we need to take Jesus seriously when he says that the heart of the problem is the human heart itself. If we are filled with anger and hate, then we are in serious, serious trouble. Anger is destructive to others, and it is destructive to us. We know how destructive anger can be to others, but we may not be conscious of how destructive that anger can be to ourselves. You know, we are told that a rattlesnake, if it is cornered, will bite itself. Anger and resentment are like that. They are destructive not only to others, but also to us. So this morning I want to see if we can find some kind of guidelines maybe that will help us deal with our anger in constructive ways. So if none of you have any issues with anger here this morning, then I'll just go back and sit down. No? Okay. So let's get to some, of course we do. We all do. So let's get to some guidelines maybe to help us here this morning. First guideline, there are times when anger is the right response. There are times when anger is correct. When Jesus told us to turn the other cheek, he did not mean for us to be doormats for everyone to walk on us. Jesus was certainly no doormat. He drove the tax collectors out of the temple. He was angry with those who criticized him for healing on the Sabbath. Mark 3:5 says that he even looked at them with anger. Matthew 23:17, he called the Pharisees blind fools. So there is a place. There is a place for anger. Anger is not a sin. Paul tells us in Ephesians 4:26, be angry and do not sin. So there are times when expressing our anger is the appropriate response. It's the right thing to do. There's an old story of a Swami at a village temple in Bengal who claimed that he had mastered anger. When his ability to control his anger was challenged, he told the story of a cobra who used to sit by the path and bite people on their way back and forth to the temple. The Swami went to visit the snake and to end the problem. Using a mantra, he called the snake to him and brought him into submission. And he told the snake that it was wrong to bite people. So the Swami persuaded it to never bite anyone ever again. Well, when the people saw that the snake now made no move to bite them, they grew unafraid of the snake. Unfortunately, before long, the village boys were tormenting the poor snake and dragging it throughout the village and teasing it and torturing it. Later, the Swami again visited the snake to see if he had kept his promise. He found the snake miserable and hurting. Swami, on seeing this, exclaimed, "You are bleeding. Tell me what has happened. How did this come to be?" The snake was in anguish and blurted out they'd been abused ever since the Swami had made them promise not to bite people ever again. To which the Swami said, "I told you not to bite. I didn't tell you not to hiss. It's appropriate to hiss when we are being abused or taken advantage of. We should express our anger in the face of evil. It's okay to hiss. Remember, even anger is a gift from God. It can be a great motivating force in our lives. Anger is only our enemy when we let it get out of control, or even worse, when we let it control us. So the first guideline is this: there are times when anger needs to be expressed. Second guideline equally is important. Anger should be resolved at the first possible opportunity. Resolve it quickly. You know, everyone gets angry. It's a natural, normal emotion. When we are upset with someone, though, the best thing to do is to face that person and say, what you did has made me angry. We all know what happens when we hold that anger and those angry feelings inside. We nurse those feelings of bitterness and resentment, and bitterness breeds more bitterness, and hatred breeds more hatred. Like a terrible beast within, such feelings of resentment, if unresolved, can and will eat away at us for years. They will eat away at our very heart and our very souls. Now I know that it is pretty cliche to say to never let the sun set on your anger. But it's a pretty good principle to live by, isn't it? It's hard to live by, but it is good. It is good to live by. It is good for your marriage. It is good for your family. It is good for your heart. It is good for your health. It is good for your business. It is good for all of your relationships. I love the movie Forrest Gump. Even if you haven't seen it, you have probably heard its most famous line, right? What's the most famous line? Life is... But I believe that there's another line worth our consideration here this morning. In one scene, Jenny is returning to her old home after her father has died. The old farmhouse is dilapidated and abandoned, and as she reflects on the abuse that she has endured as a child, she is overcome by rage, and she just begins throwing rocks at the house. The photography in the movie is powerful. It just shows her rapidly reaching for rocks and then just violently throwing them at the house. Jenny finally falls to the ground in utter exhaustion. The scene then closes with Forrest Gump sympathizing with her and saying, sometimes there just aren't enough rocks. There just aren't enough rocks. And that is so true, isn't it? No matter what anyone has done to you, sometimes there just aren't enough rocks. That's the moment. That is the moment that we have to surrender our anger. We have to give that anger over to God and allow God to replace those negative emotions with love and forgiveness. Easy? No. I know it's not. Necessary? Yes. There are times when anger is appropriate. Anger should be resolved as soon as possible. And then our third guideline this morning, unresolved anger is a spiritual problem. It is a spiritual problem. Anger not only affects our health, it not only affects our relationship with other people, it also affects our relationship with God. It's a spiritual problem. Verse 23, Jesus tells us that if we are offering our gift at the altar, we might interpret that today as worship. If we are gathering for worship, and while in the midst of worship, remember that someone has something against us, or we have something against someone else, then we are to leave. We're to go reconcile with that person, and then come and offer our gift of worship. A heart full of anger, ours or someone else's, is a spiritual problem. On May 13th, 1981, while millions of people all over the world watched, Pope John Paul II was shot by a Turkish terrorist. The man was arrested, and he was then sentenced to life in prison. Pope survived. But do you know how he dealt with his feelings of anger toward that terrorist? 2 years later, Christmas 1983, the Pope went and he met with the shooter in his prison cell to extend forgiveness and reconciliation. Did it make a difference? A year later, the man made a proclamation from his prison cell that he was renouncing terrorism to become a man of peace. He promised that if he was ever free, he would become, quote, a preacher, going to all the nations of the world preaching love and truth. You have to wonder, what would happen in our world today if all of us follow John Paul's example? Now I know that that's a whole lot easier said than done. I'll be honest, I have a really hard time letting go of anger too. But if we want to have a clean heart, if we want to have a clean heart ready to share God's love, then this is something that we have to work on. The story is told that when Leonardo da Vinci was painting the Last Supper, he had an intense and bitter argument with a fellow painter. Well, da Vinci came up with a very devious plan to get back at this other painter guy. So he decided to paint the face of his enemy on the face of Judas Iscariot. So he would be captured forever as a traitor. So that's exactly what he did. So when people came to look at his work, to see the painting while it was still in progress, they immediately knew who Judas was. It was obvious. Da Vinci got great joy out of portraying his enemy as Judas Iscariot. As he continued his work on the painting, he finally came to the face that he had saved for the very end. He'd saved Jesus for the end. They drew a mental blank. He didn't know how to draw Jesus. He had what writers might call writer's block. He could not paint a thing. Finally, God convinced him and convicted him and showed him that the trouble was that he had painted the face of his enemy on the face of Judas. His hatred and his bitterness was keeping him from seeing the face of Jesus. He went back to the image of Judas and painted some nebulous face. He then went to his enemy, he apologized, asked for forgiveness, and they were reconciled. When he returned to his painting of the Last Supper, again he could see clearly the face of Christ. And he finished one of the world's greatest paintings. You know, we all have times like that. But if Jesus can forgive us and make things right with us, then how much more should we find a way to forgive our enemies? To go and be reconciled to them. I know that anger is a hard subject, and it's not something we easily get over. But if we want to strengthen our relationship with God, then maybe following these 3 guidelines will help us. And maybe we won't need a mood ring for others to be able to know what's going on within us. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit.